Hello, good morning all. We are waiting for the participants as well as the resource person. Thank you for joining early today. Good morning, sir. Good morning, Dr. Ryan.
Good morning. Hi, good morning. How are you? Can you hear me sufficiently?
Thank you for joining us early, but you are not audible, sir.
Okay. Can you hear me better now? Can you hear me? Any sound?
Google Accounts, Microsoft Edge window, sign in, Google Accounts, tab 1 of 1. You are in the meeting hosted by Sekengush with 20 participants. Your audio is unmuted, your video is on. The meeting is being recorded. The meeting is broadcasting live on YouTube Alert.
Another resource person has joined. Dr. Shivaraman has joined.
Good morning.
We are waiting for Dr. Anita Balakrishnan and Dr. Rajakumari.
Hi, am I audible now? Is there any sound coming from me?
New tab button, show tab previews button, refresh button, home button. Zoom cloud meetings window, join the meeting button unavailable. Sign in button, version 5. Sign in button, version 5.0.
Hello? Join a meeting on the chip.
Sign in, Google Accounts, Microsoft Edge, Microsoft Zoom cloud meetings window, version 5. Sign in button, version 5. Sign in button, version 5.0.5. 26,213.060. Sign in button, version 5.
Good morning, Dr. Shivaraman.
Good morning, ma'am. Are you able to hear me?
Good morning, sir.
Zoom Cloud Meetings window.
Are you able to hear me? Hello, are you able to hear me? Hello? Hello, can you hear me? Hello?
Version 5 sign in button. Space. Zoom is selected. Email letter. Enter your email password. Forgot pat. Keep me signed in. Sign in with SSO button. Sign in with face.
Hello?
Back to the previous Keller Ajaswari has joined. Email letter. Enter your email. Sign in. Zoom Cloud Meetings. Zoom Cloud Meetings window. Email letter. Enter your email password. Forgot password. Keep me signed in. Checkbox checked. Sign in with SSO
Shivaraman, sir,
button.
we cannot hear you.
1 minute, 1 minute.
Zoom Cloud Meetings window.
Hello?
Can you hear me? Hello?
Sign in with Google button. Hey, sign in. Google accounts Microsoft Edge. Microsoft Edge window. Refresh button. Opening new tab. Loading page. Stop. About blank invalid entries.
1 minute, 1 minute.
And Mommy MU10B has joined
What's
the
the
meeting
channel?
alert. Zoom button. Got it button. Zoom John Ryan has joined the meeting alert. Clickable list with 2 items. Environment VVS severe views and other privacy terms of service. Zoom Cloud Meetings window. Sign in with Google button. Sign in with Facebook button. Back to the free sign up free open the email edit enter. End meeting or leave meeting window.
No.
Password edit enter your forgot pack keep me signed in checkbox checked. Skype 3 row 1 Zoom meeting row 1 column 3.
Hello, can everyone
Sir, Ryan, sir, your voice is,
Ma'am,
we
can you
cannot
hear
hear
me?
you.
can you
Audio
hear me
is
now?
missing, sir.
Now unmuted alert.
Now can you hear me? Hello, good
Yes, sir.
morning, everyone.
Good morning,
Hello,
sir.
good morning, everyone. I'm Shivaraman.
Good morning.
I'm Dr. Shivaraman. Can you hear me?
Yes, sir, we're able to hear you.
Yes, sir.
Yeah, okay. Thank you.
Hello, everyone. Can you hear me? Can you hear me? Hello, it's John Ryan here.
Yes, sir. We can hear you, sir.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Yes, sir.
Audio now unmuted alert.
Ma'am, I have unmuted my audio. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes, sir.
Yeah,
Yes, sir.
because it says the host would like you to unmute. I have unmuted.
Actual Jason has joined.
Okay then.
சரி மேம். ஆனா இவ்வளவு நேரம் எனக்கு எதுவும் கேட்கல மேம். ஓகே மேம். ஓகே மேம்.
Good morning, participants. There are 30 participants now, and we are waiting for the resource person, Dr. Anita Balakrishnan. Hello, good morning all. Hope I'm audible. We are waiting for the resource person, Dr. Anita Balakrishnan. She'll be joining us within a few minutes. Good morning all. Welcome to the webinar. We are waiting for the resource person to join us. She's joining us now. Wait for some time.
Hello, good morning.
Good morning.
All the resource person have joined except Dr. Rajakumari, Dr. Ryan, Dr. Anita Balakrishnan and Dr. Shivaraman are with us today. Welcome all. We'll wait for 5 more minutes for Dr. Rajakumari to join.
Yeah, good morning, everybody.
Good morning, madam. Welcome.
Dr. Rajakumari has also joined. I think we can start because it's almost 9:50.
Yeah, we can start.
Good morning to all. On behalf of the PG Department of English of Soka Ikeda College, I welcome you all for the international webinar on new avenues for research. Many of you must be wondering, what is this Soka Ikeda? Soka is a Japanese word which means value creation. The Soka system of education Soka is a Japanese word which means value creation, and Soka system of education stresses on values rather than knowledge building. This Soka system of education was initiated by Magikuchi and followed by Jose Toda. From Jose Toda, it was taken up by Dr. Daisaku Ikeda, who founded the Soka University in Tokyo. Soka Gakkai International is a world-renowned organization, world-renowned group, which has institutions across the world. Dr. Daisaku Ikeda is a world-renowned poet, educator, philosopher, and a peacemaker. His poem on Mother attracted many. Our chairman, Dr. Sethu Kumanan, a Tamil poet and a philanthropist, was inspired by the poem written by Dr. Daisaku Ikeda on Mother. And he started this women's college in the year 2000 in the semi-rural locale Madananguppam exclusively for women. Those days, it was very hard for women to get education. 20 years back, our chairman started this institution exclusively for women in the rural background. Today, the college offers education to thousands of women through various disciplines. The Department of English was inducted in the year 2000, and in 2004, it offered BA English, and in 2015, it became a PG department. There are several achievements and accolades to its credit, and this webinar is yet another credit to the department. At this juncture, we offer our thanks to our principal, Dr. M. Samshat, who motivated us to do this webinar. Thank you. We have 4 eminent guests with us today, and let me introduce them to you all. This is Dr. Ryan. Dr. John Charles Ryan is an associate professor at Southern Cross University, Australia. He is also a renowned poet and non-fiction writer. He writes extensively on plant life and human relationship to the natural world. His areas of expertise are cultural studies, literary studies, environmental studies, creative writing, and digital arts. He has published several research articles, and his articles are cited by people across the globe, leading up to 108 citations. He has published 46 research papers and has taken up 9 projects. Australian wetland cultures, swamps, and environmental crisis, overturning the sudden end, new interpretation of catastrophe are the notable ones. He has authored several books, and some of them are Language of Plants, Science, Philosophy, Literature, Digital Arts, An Introduction to New Media, Green Thread, Dialogues with Vegetal World, Plants in Contemporary Poetry, Eco-Criticism and Botanical Imagination, Seaweed, a Book of Algae, An Introduction to Sustainability and Aesthetics, The Arts and Design for Environment. This is a very condensed report of his achievements, and on behalf of the department, I extend the most cordial welcome to Dr. John Charles Ryan. Our next resource person is Dr. Anita Balakrishnan, Professor and former head of English, Queen Mary's College, Chennai. She is a passionate teacher and has more than 3 decades of teaching expertise. She has published 27 research papers in international journals. She has also written books. She has contributed chapters to several books, and her individual book, Parnassus, Focus on Women's Issues, Sarah Brucken and Transforming the Spirit of, is a very important book. And the next book is Transforming the Spirit of Contemporary Indian Women Writers. And these books have received a lot of acclaim. She has guided several PhD scholars and MPhil scholars. And she is a constant supporter of our department, and she has supported us and helped us in many of our endeavors. I take this opportunity to thank her and extend my most cordial welcome to her.
Thank you.
Our next resource person is Dr. Shivaraman. He is the Associate Professor of English in Presidency College, Chennai. He has almost 2 decades of professional experience. His area of specialization is Indian drama, educational and assistive technology for persons with visual impairment. He has presented research papers in seminars and conferences. He has received NBA award from Honorable Governor of Tamil Nadu for his service to the education of the visually challenged community. He is a coordinator of Arunodaya Presidency College Research Center for Differently Abled and has converted more than 30,000 books into accessible as well as audio formats. We are extremely proud to have Dr. Shivaraman here today, and I extend my warm welcome to him. Welcome, sir.
Hello, thank you.
Our next resource person is Dr. Rajakumari. She is the Assistant Professor of English at Chendamar's Women's College, Guindy, Chennai. She has done all her education in Chennai, and her doctoral thesis, she finished her thesis in the year 2012. And she, in the last decade of service, she has presented papers in national and international conferences and has published research papers in journals. She is an invited speaker and has delivered speeches in several academic programs. Very importantly, during this COVID lockdown, she has contributed relief material to the needy in Chennai, and her program was telecasted in the News 7 channel. On behalf of the department, I extend a warm welcome to you, ma'am. I welcome all the participants.
Thank you, ma'am.
Dr. Ryan?
Yes, yes.
Dr. Ryan?
Yes, this is John, Dr. John Ryan. Hear me? Can you hear me sufficiently?
Anita, ma'am?
Yes, Sandhya.
I think I lost connectivity with Dr. Ryan. Anita, ma'am, am I audible to you, ma'am?
Yeah, yes, you are.
We can hear.
Ma'am, I think you have to unmute your speaker and you can speak, ma'am.
Ma'am,
I have to.
Sandhya, ma'am, can you hear me? Sandhya, ma'am.
Dr. Ryan?
Yes. Yes, can you hear me? Hello, hello? I'm here.
Sandhya, ma'am, we can hear Ryan, sir.
Anita ma'am, can you? start
Yeah,
the
yeah,
presentation,
Sandhya,
ma'am?
I can hear you. I can hear you. Yeah. We can, you're audible. Actually, I think everybody can hear each other. I think pretty much.
Anita ma'am, could you hear me? This
Yeah,
is
I can
Rajni.
hear you. I can hear
Ryan
you.
sir, even Ryan sir is quite audible.
Yeah, yeah, quite audible. And Sandhya is audible. Yeah,
Yes, I can hear you both well as well.
yeah.
Okay. Can I please share my screen, please? The host enable screen sharing, please. I have PowerPoint slides to show. When I click screen sharing, it says host disabled participant screen sharing. Could the host please enable screen sharing?
Sandhya, can you hear us? Sandhya?
When I click screen share on my Zoom, it says host disabled participant screen sharing. Could the host please enable screen sharing? Okay, great. Thank you. Thank you so much. Yep. Okay. Share this. All right. Okay. Okay. Great. Thank you so much for me here.
என் ஃபேஸ் இங்க கீழே தெரிஞ்சதுன்னா அதை எப்படி கட் பண்ணும்? உன் ஃபேஸ்னா நீ இப்ப இருக்கிற மாதிரியா இல்ல உன் மெயில் ஐடியா? மெயில் ஐடி அது தெரிஞ்சதா?
Participants, please unmute. Unmute your speaker, please.
அங்க போக கூடாதுன்னு சொன்னாங்க.
Participants, please mute.
Okay. So all right, everyone ready? Okay, my sincere thanks to the organizers for this opportunity to speak about Aboriginal Australian poetry. As
Participants, please mute. Yes, sir.
Okay, ready? Yep. Okay, my sincere thanks to the organizers for this opportunity to speak about Aboriginal Australian poetry as a literary episode, and specifically the poet Bill Needy's Story About Feeling, which is a collection of poetry as part of this new Avenues for Research webinar. And I'd like to thank Soka Ikeda College of Arts and Science for Women, as well as the Cape Corp Comoran Dr. Regine Silvestre for the invitation to speak this morning. So, my name is John Ryan. I'm based at Southern Cross University in Lismore, Australia, and University of Notre Dame in Broome, Australia. And I'm currently a visiting scholar at Universitas 17 Augustus 1945, or Unpad University in Surabaya, Indonesia. So thank you everyone for coordinating this webinar. Aboriginal Australian poet Bill Niji's story about feeling is an extended dialogue between the author and his many ancestors, human and non-human, who taught him to live in balance with the land. It is also a story about Niji's desire to pass his deep knowledge of culture and environment to younger generations of Aboriginal people. In the following excerpt, Niji admonishes a young man for recklessly chopping down an ancient tree. And he says, "Yes, I chop it down, that big tree. I play, I cut it, yes. You cut it yourself. When you get, about 50, you'll feel it, pain on your back as you cutted it." Written in Aboriginal English, which is a dialect used by many Aboriginal people across Australia, the lines speak of the physical implications of cutting an old tree down. So when you get, about 50, you'll feel it, pain in your back. And indeed, these trees, such as boabs, shown on the right side of the screen, these trees can live up to 2,000 years old. So they can live for many generations of human societies. Now, the clearance of ancient trees in Australia for road construction and other infrastructure, especially in northern Australia, is nothing new, still going on. But on rare occasions, there are attempts such as these to transplant these incredibly old trees to new places. And this is the famous case of Gigi Jumulo, which is a 2,000-year-old boab tree. It was transplanted from Kimberley to Perth in Australia. It was trucked for 3,200 kilometers. That's almost 2,500 miles from the northwest part of Kimberley of Australia to the southwest corner where the city of Perth is located. This tree weighs about 36 tons or 79,000 pounds. Extraordinary. And it's estimated to be 750 years old, so it's a little younger than some other boab trees. And so this was transplanted and then replanted in Perth to make way for the construction of a road bridge. And this operation, which occurred 12 years ago in 2008, is considered the longest land journey made by a tree of that size in recorded history, right? So a tree of that size has never traveled across the land in this way to this distance, right? It's that trees travel as seeds, not as complete trees. So it was an extraordinary operation. And I visited this tree in 2011 in the city of Perth, and you can see there was some green foliage coming up. It appeared relatively healthy, and an official assessment in 2016 confirmed that the tree was doing well. It was adjusting to its new home. It was much like a diasporic tree, a diasporan, transplanted from one part of Australia to another because of the incursion of neo-colonial development. Just make sure there's no emergency questions. Okay, I'll speak closer to the screen. Hopefully it's clear. Okay, so here I'm going to use that example of the boab tree, this very ancient tree, and Bill Niji's idea of feeling the pain of trees in your own body as means to talk about this idea of literary ethnobotany. And it's a central concept that I'll develop in this talk. So after theorizing the concept, after theorizing that concept, I'll look carefully at Bill Niji's story about feeling. This was published in 1989. I'll argue that story about feeling puts into narrative form the idea of human-plant communication. So humans and plants having discourse, having a form of communication in three particular ways. The first is intercorporeality, and this notion of homologies and congruences between the bodies of plants and the bodies of people. The second is the idea of affect, the entanglement of the senses and practices, material practices of plants that involve them as food, as fiber, and as ornaments, but also as totems, as spiritual objects. And the third idea that relates to this idea of literary ethnobotany that I'll look at is voice. So the registers and articulations that are specific to plant life that might constitute a form of voice in the non-human world. All right, and then I want to briefly conclude by thinking about literary ethnobotany as a biocultural intervention. So the concept of literary ethnobotany that I'm developing here, is what I call phytocritical plant focus. It looks at the representation of plants in literary work, including poetry. And Bill Niji, the indigenous writer, his work, Story About Feeling, is what we can call a verse narrative. It's a story, but it's written as a long poem. So it's a hybrid between poetry and prose. Bill Niji was a senior elder of the Kakadu people of Northern Australia. He was born in 1920 and he died in 2002. And he was the last surviving speaker of the Kakadu language of Arnhem Land. Arnhem Land is a region in Northern Australia, as the Northern Territory of Australia. So this book, Story About Feeling, was transcribed by an ethnographer, and then it was published in the late 80s. And it comprises 11 chapters on various topics having to do with indigenous relations to the natural world. The main cultural group at this work now the Kakadu people and that's the cultural background of Fiji from the Kakadu people. Now this is a national park, it's a World Heritage List park, but it's also rich in minerals and in particular uranium. So there's quite a lot of mining activity in this area. And so Niji, in this book, Story About Feeling, he narrates a range of ethnobotanical knowledge. Knowledge of the traditional names for plants, how to procure plant foods like honey and other bush foods, and the long-term care of the land through awareness of seasons and awareness of cycles, how the land transforms from phases of germination and growth to decay and respect for and dialogue with plants are essential to his poetry. Okay, and so in the second chapter of this book, Story About Feeling, and the second chapter is called Tree. It talks about plants and subjects. Trees have an ability to perceive in the poems. Trees have the ability to experience pain, so they are sentient or percipient. And in lines such as, quote, you cut a little bit, you got water coming out. That's his blood, same as your blood. So there's this idea that the tree has a body, and that we can violate the body of the tree like we violate the body of the human. So this idea of human-plant communication, of people and plants in contact and discourse, is vital to Nietzsche's work, and it's vital to this idea of literary ethnobotany. There's a lot of things out that have to do with how plants communicate. Evolutionary biologist Anne Leonard and Jacob Francis argue that plant communication underlies some of the planet's most ecologically and economically important mechanisms. So communication between plants, communication this is how the ecology of the planet operates. And scientists are slowly discovering this more and more. So when we look at it means that we are attributing a kind of agency to them, that they have capacities for experience or even cognition. So we have now outside and inside of literature is a movement away from the idea of plant communication as folk belief and towards a scientific model of plant communication in which communication is essential to survival. This idea that I'm proposing, literary ethnobotany, that's the broader term that I'm using for it, it involves a kind of what you may call a rapprochement, a reconciliation between aesthetic, scientific, and aboriginal conceptions of plants, right? So a plant can be understood as scientific object, but for a poet, plant is an object, perhaps a living object who the poet has communication with. For indigenous and aboriginal people, they're part of the ancestral of particular culture. So that's where this idea of literary botany becomes like a rapprochement between these very different ideas of plants and how plants function, right? Is their being in the world, right? So plant ontology is essential to indigenous knowledge of the world. And this is more important. There are cultural dimensions of that knowledge that are also lost, right? So as native plant populations decline, so too does ancestral knowledge of them. That's the point, this idea of a literary ethnography. And so for Nietzsche, this land becomes a democratic space inhabited by a multitude of beings of which humans are just one manifestation. Cosmological facets. So here are the key features of literary ethnobotany. Criticism and ethnobotany is dialogue. Human environment. Ethnobotany is a social science and clinical science discipline that quantitatively assesses how people plants. And so literary ethnobotany attempts to bring eco-criticism into dialogue with ethnobotany. So works of literary ethnobotany narrate interactions with, understandings of, and uses of plants as foods, fibers, ornaments, medicines, and spiritual objects, spiritual totems. A work of literary ethnobotany, such as Bill Nietzsche's story about feeling, documents this traditional ecological knowledge of plants in an era of widespread biodiversity loss. So this is the background context for this study, that plant diversity is declining across the world. And as plant diversity declines, so too does knowledge of those plants. Okay. And finally, what can a work of literary ethnobotany include? Well, certainly poetry, but we can also find prose fiction and prose nonfiction works of literary ethnobotany. Dramatic scripts could be examples of literary ethnobotany, and also digital media. We can think of all literary forms as having a potential literary ethnobotanical content. Okay, so in its literary ethnobotanical orientation, Nietzsche's story about feeling marks a convergence between traditional cultural knowledge of plants and the verse form narrative itself as a kind of tradition, verse form narrative. In contrast to European botanical science and its imperial, colonial, and neocolonial histories, biocultural connections between Aboriginal Australian people and plants counter the ideological impulse to appropriate plants as resources, as materials, as symbols, and as objects. Lots of traditional botanical knowledge is enclosed in Aboriginal stories of plants, right? So this is a species called the Waratah. This is a national symbol of Australia. And so in one level, we can understand this species as a political symbol or as an aesthetic object. But for Aboriginal people, it's much more than that. When many Aboriginal people see this species, they're reminded of a traditional story of a woman named Krubi, who's wrapped in a red kangaroo cloak, awaiting the return of her lover, the warrior Bamai. After his death in battle, she refuses to eat, withers away, and dies. A crimson flower, as its stem as high as a long spear, emerges from the spot where she passed on. Resembling a broken heart, the flower petals are shaped as teardrops. So the name Waratah, which is the name for this species, represents that story for many Aboriginal people. So this is very much about seeing plant life differently, and that's what literary ethnobotany allows us to do, to understand the plant world in a much different way. Now, in contemporary Aboriginal poetry, we have to bear in mind that the contemporary tradition of Aboriginal poetry comes out of a more than 60,000 year lineage of Aboriginal people living on the continent of Australia and learning how to make a living. And this is an extraordinary tradition. So many of these traditional stories, or what they're called is dreaming stories, many dreaming or creation stories are still told by Aboriginal people. And these stories might be multiple tens of thousands of years old. And so Aboriginal poetry, which can be traced back really to 1964 with the publication of Udru Nunapal's We Are Going, captures a lot of these oral dimensions of the Aboriginal dreaming story tradition, which is potentially more than 60,000 years old. So there's an extraordinary lineage that contemporary Aboriginal poetry draws from. So the Kamburu Waka Waka philosopher Mary Graham, that's an Aboriginal cultural group, emphasizes that the sacred web of connections includes not only kinship relations and relations to the land, but also relations to nature and all living things. And so Aboriginal poetry communicates this kind of relationality. But it also, at the same time, poses different critiques of the neo-colonial powers that interrupt these traditional relations between humans and plants, between humans and animals. What we also find in Aboriginal knowledge and also literary ethnobotany of this kind is a reduction of the hierarchies between plants and other beings. So the scala natura, the idea that humans are at the top of the pyramid, and then animals, and then plants somewhere at the bottom, that whole order is disrupted by the Aboriginal perspective on nature as more communal, as there being more egalitarianism between organisms who are all communicative, who are in dialogue. So an Aboriginal person will feel in communication with plants, with animals, with the land, rather than seeing those plants, animals, and land as mute. There's an incredible sense of agency attributed to the non-human world. And so we can think of Aboriginal poetry as performing this intervention, right? Intervention into the loss of this precious biocultural knowledge. And it performs this intervention in a traditional textual form, but this textual form, as we'll see, has many oral elements. It captures many elements of the oral tradition of Aboriginal storytelling. So as a means of maintaining cultural traditions, Niji's poetry remains significant in Australia. This is an island continent, of course. It's the second driest landmass in the world. But as the fires of 2019 and 20 demonstrated, it's a very, very susceptible, very vulnerable landmass. And so as those great fires roll through the Australian landmass, many species are lost. But on the other side of this, there's an incredible resilience in the land and in the plants in particular to adapt to fire. And so many plants, such as this one here, are adapted to fire. In fact, some of them require smoke from fire to germinate. And so while fire is a destructive force in Australia, it's also a highly creative and highly evolutionarily adapted force. And so poetry, Aboriginal poetry, such as Bill Niji's, captures this element of a very ancient landmass with a high diversity of plants and animals, with very extensive stories, 60 or more thousand years old, telling of the origins of these plants and animals, but also that these plants and animals are now acutely under threat. That's a very essential part of Aboriginal poetry. Now, in the story about feeling, we have text. We have what I call the literary ethnobotany that captures these traditional relations to plants. But what we also have are images. And so this is an image from an Aboriginal artist named Jack Buchanan, was born in 1947. And this is an image of a plant with a very long name called Jorkun Miltonug. Okay, and that literally means possum eat tree in the Aboriginal dialect. And so this plant, which is a fig related to the banyan, was a food for native possums and still is a food for native possums. And so the Aboriginal name captures the element of its edibility for animal life. And so as the reader pages through this book, the reader can also enjoy the images which convey ethnobotanical information. And so we find in the text a convergence between the written word and the visual image, where you can read the caption of this image and know that the plant is important for Aboriginal people, but also important for possums, which are essential sources of food for many Aboriginal cultures. So these sorts of ideas coalesce in my conception of literary ethnobotany, which builds upon some really fresh and recent developments in disciplinary environmental studies. The first is environmental humanities, and this applies humanity-based approaches to resolving environmental issues. So literary ethnobotany is a practice of the environmental humanities. also post-colonial eco-criticism. This is a convergence of post-colonial studies, post-colonial criticism, and eco-criticism. So this approach locates environmental crisis in colonial and neo-colonial discourses. So when we think about plants, we might think of neo-colonial discourses of plants as commodities, as standing reserve, right? As resources to be exploited for colonial and neo-colonial development. And that's why a post-colonial eco-critical perspective is essential. As we talk about new avenues for research, these are very, very much that. They're new avenues for interdisciplinary literary studies research. One is that I've been developing is called psychocriticism, which tends to the representations of plants and environmental texts. And another is a scientific area called cognition. And this explores the idea that plants have the capacity to learn, communicate, and behave. So if we are interdisciplinary literary scholars, we can look towards new science that's coming out as a way to better understand the texts that we're reading. And that's the approach that I use. I bring science into discourse with Indigenous studies, into discourse with literary studies to develop a better perspective on the literary work that I read. So let's get down to the work itself, literary ethnobotany of story about feeling. So once again, Bill Nietzsche was a senior elder, or an elder, if the term in Australia is elder, or senior law man of Blackview National Park. And the other term for this is a traditional owner, the original Aboriginal occupants of the land. And this is in the Northern Territory of Australia, where he lived and worked. A story about feeling, an old man's story in a posthumous work, they're what you can call verse narratives. They are prose works that use poetic form. So the verse narratives are hybrids between poetry and prose, and that's very much the genre of story about feeling. And a story about feeling demonstrates these traditional ideas of plants, traditional ontologies of plants, as being communicative, as having the ability to converse with human beings and with animals and other forms of life. So that's essential, and it represents a departure from the kind of colonialist view of plants as something to be conquered or something to be cleared, right? So there's Bill Nietzsche, and he understood his storytelling gift as a means to communicate to Indigenous and non-Indigenous people about the urgency of protecting land and culture. In Story About Feeling, there are problems of uranium mining, road construction, the despoilation of ceremonial sites, the cutting down of sacred trees such as the Boab. And these are all filtering through Story About Feeling, alongside those traditional understandings of plants that Bill Nietzsche wants to pass to younger generations of Aboriginal custodians. And so we see here, this is Kakadu National Park, or Gachagu National Park, which is now a protected area. So this is the traditional land of Bill Nietzsche, and he was a living elder there, and certainly his spirit is still there. We also have to think of the rock art that is quite near to this site. Rock art such as this might be tens of thousands of years old, and it also factors into Bill Nietzsche's conception of the world, into his motivation to protect Aboriginal culture, and many times these rock art works represent different kinds of plants. So there's a connection between literary ethnobotany as a text and literary ethnobotany as an image. In this case, as a rock painting or rock drawing. So let's look at the first idea. What I've suggested so far is that literary ethnobotany represents a convergence between eco-criticism and ethnobotany, and that it gives us a perspective for appreciating, in this case, Indigenous Australian poetry. And I've suggested that communication between plants and people occurs on 3 levels. And the first is the intercorporeal, what I call the intercorporeal. Now let's look at that, what that means. Okay, so the intercorporeal dimension between plants and people. What this suggests, this idea of intercorporeality, it comes from the phenomenological tradition of European philosophy. And I'll just find my place here. It constitutes one kind of mode of being in communication, although that communication is taking place on a bodily level. So intercorporeality has been defined by phenomenologist Merleau-Ponty and others as pointing to the role of embodied interactions between the self and the other in the process of social understanding. And through these embodied interactions, intersubjective meaning emerges. This is a kind of production of knowledge that occurs outside of the domain of the mind. It's an embodied knowledge that results from an intercorporeal relation. And so Aboriginal people have what can be described very much as an intercorporeal relation to plants in the simplest sense that they are, Aboriginal people are eating these plants, using them for fiber, using them for fuel, etc. So there is a great sense of intercorporeality in Niji's poetry. So in the text, this intercorporeality converts to what I call bodily homologies. And what that means is that it's a simple idea, in fact, that comes from science. We could say that, for example, the arms of the mammal or the arms of the human are like the wings of the bird, right? It's a symbolization, it's a poetic comparison. That is actually a homology or an homology. And it comes from the idea in evolutionary biology that we derive from the same ancestor, right? So the arm of the human and the bird, the wing of the bird, are thought in scientific evolutionary thought to be coming from a shared ancestor. And so we see this idea of a bodily homology in Niji's work. And let's look at this passage. So this is from Story About Feeling. So tree, grass, star. Because star and tree working with you, we got blood pressure, but same thing, spirit on your body. What are you working with you? That tree, same thing. Your body, my body, I suppose. I'm same as you, anyone. Tree working when you're sleeping and dreaming. So these are deceptively simple lines, but in fact, they cross a number of divisions between life forms, between plant, between human, between spirit, between universe. And if we look at this first line, we can think of this as a serialization, right? A serial comma is one after the other, right? So this is a piece of layout in the poem that actually communicates a sense of great interconnectivity. Tree, comma, grass, comma, star, ellipsis, right? That's the serialization of life forms, including the stars as living beings. That's a very important textual element. And so there's this sense of interrelation between things, but that each also maintains its identity. The most important metaphor here, though, is blood pressure. And this is more than a metaphor, though. I think of this as what I call a material homology, because it implicates trees and plants, humans, and the celestial, right? That human, plant, tree, universe, cosmos. There's all a kind of blood pressure at work. And for Bill Nietzsche in particular, this blood pressure was called Jang, D-J-A-N-G. And that's like an animating spirit, a life force. So this blood pressure, this animating spirit moves through humans and also moves through animals and plants and moves through the cosmos and moves through the heavens. That's a very important homology there. It can be considered figurative language, yes, but to call it purely figurative diminishes what it's actually accomplishing in the poem, this use of the idea of blood pressure. Okay, and so the tree, same thing, your body, my body, right? Another example of serialization, your body, comma, my body, I suppose, that we have this bodily linkage, this intercorporeality. So I love it, tree, because he loved me too. He watching me same as you. Tree, he working with your body, my body. He working with us. While you sleep, he working. Daylight, when you walking around, he work too. That tree, grass, I don't like our father. Earth, I sleep with this earth. Grass, just like your brother. In my blood, in my arm, this grass. So those same techniques of serialization occurs. So there's this comma here, your body, my body, not and, but adjacent. Your body, comma, my body. There's no need there for a conjunction, conjoining word. There's a literal, physical proximity between the words that parallels the proximity between the speaker's body and the plant's body. Now you might look at this passage and think, well, what is E, and other uses of E? What that is actually a radically inclusive pronoun that's common in Aboriginal English. And so E could be a woman, E could be a he, a man, E could be a them, E could be an it, E could be a you, right? E could be anything. And that's what makes it so, yes? That's what makes it so inclusive. How much time do I have now? Can someone give me a time count, please? Okay, so the first way in which that dialogue is created is corporeality. The second is through affect. Affect is more than feeling, it's more than emotion. It has to do with the voice announcing itself to the world. And so here's Bill Nietzsche digging yams, and he's saying, I'm your old man. He's telling this to a younger yam harvester. I'm your old man, but I'm telling you, you dig yam? Yes. Well, one of your granny or mother, you digging through the belly. You must cover them up, cover again. When you get yam, you cover, so no hole through there, because you're killing yam, other thing, you got to hang on. So there's a sense of digging through the body of the earth to collect these fruits of the earth, this bush tucker, this yam. There's also an idea of plants as medicines, right? As foods, but also medicines and having personalities. So here's the collection of the yam. Also that the yam can clean your body, it can clean your blood. So it's both a food and a medicine. And that's the essence of literary ethnobotany, as I'm and the third and final element is voice. So if we can communicate with plants, or if Aboriginal people can, and that also happens in poetry, and there must be a voice at play. It's not a voice in English, it's another way. And this idea of voice factors into Nietzsche's conception of plants. That tree now feeling he blow, sit quiet, you speaking. That tree now he speak, that windy blow, he can listen. Tree, yes, that story he listen. Story, you and me same, grass and listen. So the tree can speak, but he can also listen. The tree can watch, but he can also be watched. and et cetera and so forth. So the idea here that the trees give people signs that they are constantly in communication with the human world. So just to wrap up, hopefully you could have heard some of that. And if not, I apologize for the poor connections. Literary ethnobotany is a new avenue of literary research. And it intervenes in this loss of knowledge of plants. In this example, in Aboriginal societies, you have a literary ethnobotany of an Indian work, or an Indonesian work, or an American work. It's a genre and a framework, a critical perspective that applies broadly to literature. And so there's a recuperation at work here. That the text is capturing this knowledge, communicating this knowledge beyond the life of the author himself. And this animacy of the plant world comes from the dreaming, comes from the ancestors, but it can be experienced in everyday life through these bodily connections, through our emotions and affect, and through the idea of voice as the ways in which plants speak to us in our everyday lives. So thank you very much.
Wait, good morning. Can anyone hear me? Am I audible? Dr. Sandhya Lakshmi, can you hear me?
Thank you, sir. Thank you, Dr. Ryan, sir.
Thank you.
May now request you're audible, ma'am. Yes, ma'am. Yes, ma'am. Please go ahead, ma'am.
Yeah, I'm not able to share my screen. I'm still looking at, yeah, I think, yeah, I hope everyone can see my screen now. Good morning. I'm, as Dr. Sandhya Lakshmi has so kindly introduced me, I'm Dr. Anita Balakrishnan. And I'd like to start by thanking the organizers, Soka Ikeda College for Women and Dr. Sandhya Lakshmi for inviting me to be a part of this webinar today. And I'd also like to thank Dr. Ryan and Dr. Rajakumari, and Dr. Sivaraman, my co-presenters. And yeah, so, you know, mine is a very, quite a basic presentation today. I'm going to look at some of the fundamentals of this discipline of eco-criticism, because I think as I interact with students, I see that there's still a lot of uncertainty as to how to actually proceed with eco-critical research. And I have been working in this area for over 15 years now. And while I see that internationally, there's a lot of interest in eco-criticism and several publications, in India, there is a vast variety of eco-critical texts that can be interpreted eco-critically. But I don't see very many publications emerging. I have published a few in books and in journals. And so I thought it would be a good introduction to young eco-critics to this very current field that has, particularly as we're in the midst of so many ecological disasters. Last year, we had this huge wildfires in Australia with the great loss of animal life, and we see all these devastating hurricanes and cyclones with causing so much damage. So in this context, I think as humanities scholars, there's a great deal of interest in how, through the environmental humanities, we can address these ecological problems and the interaction between literary texts and the physical environment. So moving onwards, I'm going to first start with some introductions. Of course, William Bruckert in 1978 for the first time used the term eco-criticism, and he meant the application of ecology and ecological concepts to the study of literature. So going forward from that, we may say that eco-criticism is the critical analysis of literature through the lenses of environmental justice and environmental ethics. And of course, homage to Cheryl Glodfelty. She, even as a PhD scholar, wrote to a series of other scholars in the United States and published the first reader, the eco-criticism reader, you see it there on screen, in 1996, a collection of 18 essays that outlined the dimensions of the field. And yeah, so her definition, it's the study of the relationship between literature and the physical environment. Again, a very wide-ranging definition there. And Greg Gerard, he asserts that eco-criticism always includes a political and moral agenda. So here I'd like to reiterate that it's not so much about the theory, but more about the practice of eco-criticism. The emphasis is on the concepts of ecological justice and on environmental ethics. So let me just outline some of the major philosophical positions that inform this field. So you have deep ecology, ecofeminism, and social ecology. Deep ecology is the idea that humans are part of the natural environment, and they have, and like humans, all other natural living and non-living entities have intrinsic value in nature. So the deep ecological position, of course, it's not always, you do have to qualify the deep ecological position. The philosophy which was outlined by the Norwegian philosopher Arne Næss, and he outlined 8 principles of deep ecology. For instance, we are in the midst of this global pandemic caused by the novel coronavirus now. And so if we respect the right to life of all forms in nature, then it raises this ethical question. Do we recognize the right of the novel coronavirus also to exist? And I think it's quite clear that we have to develop vaccines and cure people of this virus and try to kill this virus. So you need to take a qualified approach to deep ecology as a philosophy. And moving onwards to ecofeminism. So ecofeminism looks at the dualisms that subjugate women and nature. So if you look at the binaries that structure our approach to language and our approach to the world, then you see that it's structured in terms of culture, nature, man, woman, mind, matter, and so on. So you see that those on the left are always considered to be subservient to the first term. So according to this, then women and nature are subjugated by patriarchy in order to enable the use, abuse, and overuse of nature and women by men for their benefit. And yeah, there are some certain varieties of ecofeminism, and we have material ecofeminism, which looks at concepts such as wage and conditions of work and discrimination at work and so on, and the value accorded to these aspects. And to this very day, it's a problem because there is a vast difference between the value accorded to male labor, the wages paid to men, and the kind of treatment that men receive at work, and the way women's labor is valued in society. And so this is material ecofeminism, and then you have spiritual ecofeminism. And when you look at traditional societies in Asia and Africa, you see that worship, superstition, and religion are part of female identity. And moving forward, you have cultural ecofeminism, which is very close to spiritual ecofeminism, which looks at how matrilineal cultures and cultures where women are at the center of the culture are, they propagate a more harmonious form of life, life that is, they propagate let me rephrase that. They emphasize a life, a style of life that is lived in harmony with nature. And so that is the three varieties of ecofeminism: material ecofeminism, spiritual ecofeminism, and cultural ecofeminism. Moving onwards to social ecology, this position was formulated by Mare Bookchin, and social ecology borrows from eco-Marxism, from the ideas of Marx and Engels. And they believe that this question of ecological limits, the scarcity of natural resources, arises from the class structure of society. So they believe that the social hierarchy is imposed onto natural resources as well. So if you do away with the social hierarchies, and if you're able to ensure an equitable society, then that will automatically do away with the question of ecological limits and the shortages of natural resources. So moving onwards, I thought that it would be useful. Lawrence Buell is a famous eco-critic, and he here has given a checklist of some ingredients that may be said to comprise an environmentally oriented work. So as you see that you don't see nature only as a backdrop, but you see how human history has an effect on natural history, how the two dovetail, as it were. And you also see that human interest is not the only interest in the text, and the text, the change in the environment is part of the ethical orientation of the text. So if there is some environmental damage, or if there is some pollution, and you see how humans are shown to be responsible for this damage, and you see that the environment again is not just there, it is seen as a process, so it's at least implicit in the text. This is one worldview that is central to eco-criticism, the notion of anthropocentrism. So this is a viewpoint that argues that humans are central, the most significant entities in the world. And all of Enlightenment humanism and from the Cartesian notion, I think, therefore I am, these are informed by this worldview of anthropocentrism. And this holds that humans are superior to nature, and that human life has intrinsic value, and the human interests are superior to those of all other entities in nature, such as animals, plants, and non-living things, mineral resources, and things like that. And that humans have the right, the moral right, to exploit these things, so animals, plants, and resources, for their benefit as they see fit. Moving forwards, let's look at the opposing viewpoint. This is biocentrism or ecocentrism. Biocentrism, it respects the right of all life forms, all living and non-living things. So it respects the intrinsic value. This is a term that is frequently used in eco-criticism, the intrinsic value of all living and non-living things in nature. So humans are but one part of the complex web of interconnections that forms our ecosystem. So again, the moving back to the anthropocentrism, so it leads to a species hierarchy. So as humans are considered to have greater intrinsic value, it allows them to exploit or exterminate other species, and this is called speciesism. And in critical animal studies, this is a very important aspect. As we live in a post-colonial nation, and I feel that there is a great deal of scope for analysis of texts from India, either written in the Indian and regional Indian languages, or texts written in English from India. And this is this post-colonial eco-criticism. And ecological, environmental economics, globalized economics looks at the world in terms of the global north and the global south. So the global north refers to the developed nations, largely in the West, and the global south are the developing nations, such as India and the other countries. And the countries and regions in the global south are mostly concerned with subsistence agriculture, overpopulation, and traditional fossil fuel-based technology. And Ramachandra Guha and Juan Martinez Alier, they have formulated this concept of the environmentalism of the poor. So in Western nations, they talk about preserving parks and natural areas in a pristine condition so that people can spend their leisure at these places, at pristine natural regions. Whereas Ramachandra Guha, one of the foremost environmental historians, he talks about how we need a different variety of environmentalism in the global south, one that emphasizes sustainable living and livelihoods, equitable sharing of natural resources, defending these resources against the exploitation of the state and the market, and also the link between ecological and economic security, the effect on women of ecological crises, and seeking corporate environmental responsibility for their misuse of these natural resources. At this point, I'd also like to state that Ramachandra Guha, in his book, Varieties of Environmentalism, categorizes the population of India into three. And he says that we have resource omnivores, and these are people who are the educated urban elite. And I may add, including all of us participating in this webinar today. So we consume an indiscriminate, we consume a disproportionately disproportionate amount of natural resources. For instance, water and electricity and food and so on. And we expect to live in a certain state of comfort where we don't mind paying. We have the economic resources to pay to consume all these natural resources. A disproportionate amount of these as compared to the ecosystem people. Ecosystem people, according to Ramachandra Guha, are those who barely eke out a living from the land. And they have consume a minimal amount of the resources, such as water and the other natural resources. And any ecological catastrophe, any development has a tremendously adverse impact on the lives of these people. And they are often not able to keep body and soul together as a result of the impact of this development or this ecological crisis. And the third category are ecological refugees. And these are the people who are forced to move from place to place because of environmental crises, ecological crises, or the impact of development projects. So if you have big dams and the submergence regions, these people are forced to migrate from place to place. And as we know, in India now, we have had this crisis of migrant labor, and I'll refer to it later, but you could classify the migrants also in a way as ecological refugees. And the adverse impact of development projects, Ramachandra Guha expects the corporate entities who are profiting greatly from these projects to accept environmental responsibility. For instance, recently, you may be aware that in the LG factory in Andhra Pradesh, we had a styrene gas leak and several people died. So for this, they expect the corporate entities to accept responsibility and make reparations to those who lost their lives or who were badly affected by this industrial mishap. So we move on to this, the connection between eco-criticism and the critique of development or the project of modernity. So the critique of development looks at the growth rate, urban progress and modernization, and the radically altered countrysides. And eco-critics look at they're not against development per se, but they consider the negative effects of human development to be the result of greed, of overproduction and overconsumption and overuse of natural resources, which is really unnecessary to lead a comfortable life. And they look at the impact of this overproduction and overconsumption in projects such as big dams, nuclearization, and in chemically altered agriculture. And of course, you have the famous case of Arundhati Roy. She has written this very wonderful book, the essay, Greater Common Good. And she has also, that is about the Sardar Sarovar Dam. And she has also written an essay called The End of Imagination about the nuclear testing in India. And I would highly recommend these books by Arundhati Roy because she's a very evocative writer, very passionate writer. And according to Arundhati Roy, these forms of development are not viable because they have a tremendously negative impact on the two categories that I spoke about, on the ecosystem people and the ecological refugees. And so the thesis of Ulrich Beck related to modernity and development. And this is a little bit shocking because according to Ulrich Beck, he believes that risk is something that is built in. Risk is built in to these to modernity and development, and that governments assess, calculate, and that governments admit that risk is intrinsic to modernity and development, and that they build this risk. So if you see this, the Bhopal gas tragedy, or if you look at Chernobyl, this was not accidental. This was not that they didn't know it would happen. Governments know that risk is intrinsic to development, and they build in risk assessment to the project of to their projects. So the developmental projects. And so we come to this aspect of how sometimes it's spectacular, like in when you look at Chernobyl or when you look at the Bhopal gas tragedy. And we live in a world where we consume the news and we are used to spectacle. We look at murders and bomb blasts, and that is what attracts us, so that we are used to this aspect of spectacular news. So in that kind of a scenario, how do we then make people concerned about the melting of glaciers, which takes hundreds of years, or how do we make them aware of global warming? Again, a very slow, accretive process. This is what Rob Nixon writes about in his book, Slow Violence, and it is subtitled The Environmentalism of the Poor. Again, please, this is available as a free to download book. So please look at it, or you can buy the book. And he is a scholar of English. He is a professor of English. So the analysis is done in very literary terms. So it's very useful to eco-critics who are working with literary texts. And he looks at One, the Sardar Sarovar Dam, the big dams. He looks at Wangari Maathai and the project of deforestation in Kenya. And he also looks at open cast mining and then the loss of tribal traditional lifestyles in his book. And moving forward, so Zygmunt Bauman also interacts with Ulrich Beck's theory and in his book, Modernity and Outcast. And he says that development is a process and waste is integral to this process. And so you have waste, excess, and surplus. That is part of the process of development. And this has led to a new area of study, which is called discard studies. Now referring back to our migrant crisis, he says that people, processes, and things are categorized as waste, and questions of value are accorded to these categories. So if you look at our migrants, for instance, due to the uneven development in India, so the southern states and the national capital region, they had a greater number of employment opportunities for this unorganized sector of workers. And so it led to the migration of people from Bihar and Uttar Pradesh and Orissa to these states. But when there was the lockdown due to the coronavirus crisis, these people, their wages had been at a subsistence level. So they couldn't sustain life. There was no safety net for them in their places of work. So they couldn't stay there for longer than 2 weeks or so. So we had this rather heart-rending spectacle of thousands of these migrants because the means of mass transport had been stopped. We saw them trying to walk back, or sometimes, of course, taken in trains or buses back to their places of origin. So again, these are people who were considered to be waste or surplus due to the coronavirus lockdown. And the irony that I would like to point out now is that now that the industries are opening up again, these employers are willing to pay 3 times the wages that they were originally paying. And they are willing to pay for them to be flown back on flights back to their original places of work, or they're spending lakhs of rupees to get the workers back and pay them 3 times as much. So it gives you an example of how much profit the industrialist or the owner of that enterprise was originally making, that he's willing to make these reparations to the workers. So yes, before I conclude, I just like to briefly, I'm sorry, just a sec. Briefly, I'd just like to go over some of the aspects that I outlined. First of all, I would entreat all my young eco-critics to boldly go forward. The field is wide open, particularly with Indian texts, Indian regional language texts and translation. And I would also encourage you not to work on Amitav Ghosh's The Hungry Tide, because this has almost become a default option. We joke at eco-critical conferences that it's a default option for people working in eco-criticism. And there is so much work been done on The Hungry Tide. But I could give you examples of displacement narratives. So you see Rajam Krishnan's When the Kurunji Blooms. That is a displacement narrative, the displacement of the Badaga tribe, and also the loss of the traditional lifestyle of the Badaga tribe due to the construction of the Paikara Dam. Also, if you want to go into critical animal studies, please look at texts like Vadi Vasal, or you can also, this is C.U. Chalapa's Vadi Vasal, which is a text that is Oxford text in translation, one of the series. There's also a book called Dvipa by Na D'Souza, which is also a part of the same series of Oxford
Audio now unmuted alert.
translation, which is also a displacement narrative. And you also have a range of memoirs. I could give you an example of C.K. Janu's Mother Forest, which is a memoir of a tribal leader. And she talks about, again, their deep ecological lifestyle, their biocentric lifestyle, how they live in harmony with with nature in the forest. They never go hungry. They never want for anything. And there are also texts like Nandanvan, which is a short story written by Lakshmi Kannan.
Video now start. Anu has left the meeting.
I just like to say that there are several texts. There's the field is wide open. So all you young eco-critics, also please go boldly forward. And
Video now stop alert.
That there exists this Association for the Study of Literature and Environment, which is an American association, and they publish a journal called Interdisciplinary Studies in Literature and the Environment. And they have a lot of papers that are free to download. And also, please do contact me. I'm always ready to encourage scholars who are working in this area. And I'd like to thank you for your patient hearing. And I'd also like to thank Dr. Sandhya Lakshmi and the organizer, Soka Ikeda College for Women, for this opportunity of participating in this webinar today. Thank you.
Video now started alert. Speech mode off.
Yeah. Can you hear me?
Yeah, Dr. Sivaraman, I think it's you are on now.
Okay. Am I visible on the screen as well?
Yes, yes, and you're quite
Okay,
audible also.
Yeah, thank you. May I continue, ma'am? Or
Thank you, Anita ma'am. May
thank
now
you,
request
thank
Dr. Shivaraman to move for his presentation.
Yeah.
Shivaraman, sir.
Yeah, thank you so much. Good evening, all. Oh, sorry, I'm sorry. Good morning, rather. Yeah. I would like to place on record my deep sense of gratitude to the Soka Ikeda College for Women for this wonderful opportunity to share with you my views on post-apocalyptic literature. And my aim is actually to suggest, as Dr. Anita Balakrishnan ma'am did in the last part of her presentation, immense scope for research in this particular field. I'll take about half an hour or so maximum, or maximum I may extend by about 5 minutes, 35 minutes, to tell you about how to locate this post-apocalyptic literature. So before I move on to the topic, I would like to give you a synoptic view of my presentation. I'm planning to divide my presentation into 4 parts. Each will last for about 5 to 6 minutes or so. And in the first part, we will talk about what is apocalypse. And in the second part, we will talk about how apocalypse, that particular framework, has been incorporated into the field of literature. So you can otherwise call it apocalyptic literature. That is the second part. And in the third part, I'll say how the shift has come about in apocalyptic literature. What is so responsible actually for that particular shift, and how significant is that particular shift in the meaning of apocalypse in the field of literature. And in the last part, we'll see how we can situate that post-apocalyptic literature and where exactly in that particular post-apocalyptic literature do we have the scope for further research. Because we find quite a few youngsters now approaching their supervisors with absolutely no clue about the topic. And when they come, they ask us to suggest the topics even. We can suggest areas. So webinars of this kind, I'm very sure, will help you to locate, to choose the areas of your own interest, if it really interests you, and the scope for research that this particular area has, And above all, what relevance does it have to our contemporary times? Dr. Ryan and Dr. Anita Balakrishnan have very well highlighted, of course, the relevance of their field to our present scenario, especially to the crisis. I would also like to begin my presentation with the reiteration of the importance of this particular part of literature called apocalypse. We are now in the world of, or in the midst of crisis caused by this pandemic. So how are we to understand this? How does literature help you to understand, to have an adequate understanding of this crisis? That also matters. So let me now move on to the first part. What is meant by apocalypse, first of all? At the simplest level, you can define apocalypse as revelation. Revelation at the end of the world. That's very important. What is a revelation? Something which is revealed to you as a kind of a prophecy, as a kind of a prediction. What would happen at the end of this world? So obviously, apocalypse, which can very well be defined as revelation, has its roots in theology, religion. And we always have the tendency, when we trace the roots or when we trace the history of any scenario, only in the Western domain. That is where I think we need to concentrate more on how you can trace the history of that particular scenario, of that particular field across the world. So when you define apocalypse as revelation, the Oxford Handbook, which is often accepted as the gospel, or the Cambridge Companion to Apocalyptic Literature, or any number of books on apocalyptic imagination, they go back to Judaism. They try to locate it in Judaism. But I would like to go even farther to the 14th century BC, where you have some records available on what is called, or in the religion called Zoroastrianism, which connects us with the world of the East. And you can also connect it with many of the polytheistic religions that we have in the East. So all of them go to the extent of defining apocalypse as a revelation. This is a common thread that runs through almost all the histories of apocalypse across the world. So you can trace it back to the 14th century BC. And from there, from the East, of course, or from Persia, from India and from Persia, it moved on to the West through Judaism, and then it moved to the Christian era. So that is how you can trace the beginning or the origin of apocalypse. Now I move on to the second important part. What does literature have to do with apocalypse? Obviously, all of us treat almost all the holy scriptures as literary works. So besides the Zend Avesta, which is the holy book of the Zoroastrians, you have the book of Daniel, which is the holy book of Judaism, the Jews. And then you have the book of John, or the book of Revelation by John, which is the last book in the New Testament. So these are the landmarks, or you can otherwise call them milestones, right? From which you can understand how apocalypse has been incorporated into the fabric of literature. So when apocalypse finds its place or finds its scope within the framework of literature, what is the definition that we can give? Having arrived at the meaning of apocalypse as a mere revelation at the end of the world, which has its roots in theology or in religion, we can very well say that apocalyptic literature can be defined as a genre of a revelatory literature, taking a cue, in fact, from that simple meaning of apocalypse that I gave. It is a genre of a revelatory literature with a narrative framework. It has its own narrative framework in which a revelation is mediated by an otherworldly being, disclosing a kind of a transcendent reality to a human recipient, which is both temporal insofar as it envisages an eschatological salvation, and spatial insofar as it involves a supernatural world. They are not my words. That's how the Oxford Handbook defines apocalyptic literature. So let me not repeat that definition. Instead, I will move on to infer from that definition certain core elements which form the basis of apocalyptic literature. Number one, I told you it is a genre of a revelatory literature with a narrative framework. It has its own narrative framework. It has its own story form, in which you find a kind of a prophecy or a revelation that is being mediated by an otherworldly being. This is something that you can see. I can give the example from Hinduism, from Zoroastrianism, and from almost all the Abrahamic religions. You have a human being, enlightened human being, to whom God either descends from heaven to earth or sends a messenger of his to reveal that vision. And he is there as a prophet to reveal it to the rest of the humanity. So that is how revelatory literature has incorporated this apocalypse. So you find Krishna descending from heaven to talk to Arjuna in our own, in the religion that we are now familiar with in India, if you can call it Hinduism. Or you can see Daniel coming down, or Zoroaster coming, serving as a prophet. Or you find Jesus Christ, or you find Prophet Muhammad. So this is something that runs through almost all the religions. That's a common thread. That's why it is in fact a kind of a revelatory literature with a narrative framework. It has its own beginning, middle, and an end. And then it is mediated, that revelation is mediated, I told you, by an otherworldly being to a human agent, disclosing a transcendent reality. This is another important core element of apocalyptic literature. What is that transcendent reality? The reality that is not so very visible to us. The reality which is not so very discernible to the common man. That's precisely, transcend, all of you know, is to go beyond. Right? So transcendent reality, that is the message, that God's message, that the end of the world, that's a look at that, it envisages, which is the transcendental reality, which is both spatial and temporal. Temporal because it envisages, it envisions an eschatological salvation. What do you mean by this eschatological salvation? at the end of the world, there is that outbreak of an epidemic. There is absolute disorder. We are all familiar with what W.B. Yeats describes in that famous second coming of Jesus Christ. Things fall apart. A mere anarchy is loosed upon the world. The center cannot hold rather. The falcon cannot hear the falconer. All these things, right, point to what is called that social disorder, right? So that's the point. So that is how literature has incorporated, of course, this apocalypse, right, or this concept of apocalypse into its framework, and it takes you back. It involves a supernatural world. So much so that you are given a ray of hope. You are not pushed down into the dungeon of despair. Instead, you are given a ray of hope. At the end of the world, even if there is disorder, there will be somebody to put things in order for you. So don't be so much put off by the darkness. You will see the heaven blazing through darkness. And that's why most of the gods, their birth, when they descend from heaven to earth, their births are invariably located only in darkness. You can see that with Jesus Christ. You can see that with Krishna, all the others. So moving away from the second part, where we have said that literature has more or less incorporated the framework of theology into its own, so that it can serve the purpose of being a moral. It can serve the purpose of a moral to humanity. It is there to lead as a kindly light, to use Cardinal Newman's expression here. But moving on to the third part, because I want to rush it so that we can spend more time on the fourth part of this presentation, where we have that immense scope for future research. Yeah, I think I have another 10 to 15 more minutes. So where exactly has the shift taken place in apocalyptic literature? It has remained within the realm of theology. It has remained within the realm of God up to the medieval age. So that is precisely what we need to take into account. In other words, that famous shift from theocentrism to anthropocentrism during the time of the Enlightenment and the post-Enlightenment, or you can say Renaissance. Up to the time of Renaissance, you have literature which is primarily theocentric, God-centric. God is responsible for everything. But once you come to Renaissance, you have the primacy of reasoning over faith. You have the primacy of man, or the replacement of God with man at the center. So much so that it has become totally anthropocentric. So look at the shift in the field of this apocalyptic literature. When there is a shift from theology to anthropology, you find one thing. So long as it remains within the field of theology, there is the conflict between the good and evil. And ultimately, it is the triumph of good over evil. God either appears in person, or he descends to heaven in the name of what is called some avatar, to use to use our own expression here. And that is how he puts an end to what is called the evil. And even in the polytheistic religions, in the East, you have once again the same concept of the triumph of good over evil. And evil is represented by so many others in the pantheon of gods even. So that's how the whole thing. But look at the shift here. When this shift takes place, you must understand one thing. If God is the creator, has he created evil? That's a very famous question raised, not only by atheists, even by theists. If God is the sole creator, because Christianity or any Abrahamic religion for that matter is a monotheistic religion. So when you have a single creator, then is he responsible for the creation of evil? Is the famous question. And you find theologists or theists who believe in God, right? Believers, they all say, no, it is not so. It is there. And you find God, right, putting an end to this evil at the end of the world. And when the evil asserts itself, you will have to understand that it is the end of the world, and therefore it marks an entry into a brighter future. That is what theology has said. But when the shift, of course, takes place, what we need to understand is this God agent or this theocentrism or God being at the center is when it is replaced by man, then does man become the manifestation of evil? How does he resolve this conflict between good and evil? So this is where we need to understand the shift in clear-cut terms. So when the shift takes place, the evil trams is now interpreted. I would say interpreted. So this evil is not interpreted as a spirit, as associated with Satan. Instead, evil is interpreted as the result of the unequal distribution of wealth among people. If you are reminded of Karl Marx, you are absolutely right. Or Hegel, you are absolutely right. Or Immanuel Kant, you are right. These are the thinkers. So what have they done? They said they'd go on to interpret, they more or less retain the same narrative framework that we saw in the previous section. And what do they do now? They try to replace that evil with what is called lack in economic terms. When a person indulges in any sort of an evil practice, which is not approved by the society, it is not due to any immanent spirit. It is due to his own poverty. It is due to the lack, to use Marxian expression here. So when there is perfect governance, which can ensure perfect distribution of wealth among its citizens, there can be no evil at all. So you find the framework of apocalypse here undergoing a sort of a secularization in terms of its content. So far, it has remained within the confines of theology. And now, when you find a human agent replacing the good as well as the evil, you find the whole framework being secularized in terms of the content. So you have a human being who is responsible for everything. And when a human being, of course, tries to restore order through better governance, obviously you can have what is called that revelation. When I say revelation, it should not be understood in theological terms. It should be understood, of course, only in secular terms. And now it takes us to the last part. This is the shift, right? So when you come to the last part here, the fourth division, we have the human agent replacing evil, and you have the egalitarian setup. Even then there is evil. Even then there is disorder, there is anarchy, in the form of nuclear weapons, in the form of the environmental crisis, and in the form of disease. In spite of the human asserting himself, why do we have this crisis? So you have the time associated with the theological framework of apocalypse as cyclical. And when it transfers itself into the secular framework, then it becomes linear. The time becomes linear, so much so that there is absolutely no end to that world. You can go on expanding that future through human welfare, which can be brought about only by a human agent. Even the first two world wars, the nuclear, the Holocaust, and you have so many other things, of course, now calling all these things into question time and again. Then you have the relevance of apocalypse. People go back to religion. Where is the question of the secularization here? Right now, do we have a message? Now you have very many saints, yogis talking about apocalypse. So that is the point. So how do we locate it in the field of literature? We come to the last part. So after apocalypse, here I want to make one thing very clear. I'll finish it in about 5 to 10 minutes. So when you come to the last part, so post-apocalypse, after apocalypse. So with the hyphen, I only talk about post-apocalypse with a hyphen and not without a hyphen. When you talk about it with a hyphen, obviously you have to look upon it as a chronological phenomenon, as a chronological entity. When you do it without a hyphen, that is where the scope for research is found. Okay, now coming back to the post-apocalypse here. So because of this secularization of this framework, you find the relevance of socials, you find the relevance of sociodicy. I use the word sociodicy, SOCIODICY, replacing theodicy. You can otherwise call it the secularization, replacing theology, theological framework. It becomes more or less relevant to our social existence, to our governance. So when the evil is replaced or is being secularized as crime in modern world, obviously you have literatures that borders on this crime. You have dystopian novels, you have crime novels, and you also have the superhero, the action novels, right? And this is where we need to take into account the popular cultural forms of literature, more or less outsmarting or replacing the print versions of literature. You have only the novels, right, written, and they take off from the novel. But in the post-apocalyptic literature, where you have the crime, you have science fiction, and you also have the action-oriented novels. And they give, because there is science, there is technological advancement now, there is plenty of scope for comics, animes, and films. They are the popular cultural forms now, which require deeper study, deep study, which require lots of research. So in post-apocalyptic literature, you have you have a sort of a complex outlook. How do they look upon, so far as apocalyptic literature is concerned, up to, shall we say, the 19th century, you only have the optimistic view of apocalypse. At the end of the world, there is something. If it is God, he is there to ensure you a better future through suffering. So through suffering, you have action. And I need not tell you about what T.S. Eliot has said or what W.B. Yeats has said. And even if God is not there, at least some human agent is there who will put an end to this crisis through either action or better governance or through collective action, to use communist expression. Yeah. So that so much so that you can have the dictatorship of the proletariat, to use Stalin's expression. So when both of them fail, you have critics, you have scholars responding to this crisis either way, in optimistic terms as well as in pessimistic terms. And the popular cultural forms represent more or less the pessimistic forms. That's precisely what I'm trying to suggest. And it is for the youngsters actually to say, either to prove it or to even disprove it. It is a kind of an assumption, or to use our own academic expression, it is to present you with a hypothesis for you to work in future. What is that hypothesis? Whether the popular forms of or cultural forms such as the film, animes, comics, whether they represent the pessimistic view of the world after apocalypse, or do you find in them enough scope even to be rather optimistic about this world after apocalypse? This is the hypothesis that we can arrive at. And then one more thing. How do we understand the genre post-apocalyptic literature? You find the genre of post-apocalyptic literature sharing its boundaries with almost all the three important established literary forms. You have dystopia that is represented in science fiction. They try to borrow that dystopia, because whatever has been projected as utopia in the past has now become the dystopia. All of us know very well. Waiting for Godot, yeah. People had that hope. And what has Beckett said in that particular? If Godot had existed, if I had known it, I would have mentioned him. And that's why I've called it Waiting for Godot. So you find various genres, right? Not only the play, the traditional genres. Now you find various other fiction genres. So you find dystopia being borrowed from science fiction. You find the crime novels, and you find the action-oriented heroes. And that is what, of course, the comics indulge in, the animes, and even the films for that. End of Days, or people have quoted any number of films, of course, Mad Max, or The Sun Shines, which was released in the year 2007. You have ever so many movies. In fact, youngsters can come out even with any more number of such films. But it's not enough if you just come out with these films. What do they represent? Do they, in fact, represent the optimistic view of this apocalypse at the end of the world? Or do they go in for any sort of a negative? My observation is, it is only my initial observation, and you can take that into account. You can call that into question. My opinion, or it's only my opinion. My opinion is that all these films, animes, they make use of technology merely to thrill the audience. And it is in keeping with the commodification or with the commercialization of this particular genre. They make use of the means. They make use of the post-apocalyptic means merely for their commercial purpose. Whether they really provide us with adequate understanding of this particular scenario, of this crisis that we right now encounter, is a big question. And you can take up that big question and take up a few films for research, and you can try to respond to this question by taking up a meaningful project. And I also say, in the field of literature, in our academic field, I'll end with that. In the academic field, we are so much, especially in almost all English departments, people are so enamored of canonicity. That's often associated with British literature, American literature, and all that. You have so many other fields which have not been explored at all in English departments, especially, I mean, the Latin American region. The literature of the Latin American region, how well have we explored this area? And I would like to end on a personal note. During this pandemic or during this COVID-19 crisis, how would you call it, vacation? I do not know. Because for about 15 days or so, I was happy. After about 15 days, then I started feeling the pinch of this crisis, both physiologically and even psychologically. So I started reading. I took up a famous novelist, José Saramago from Portugal. He writes in Portuguese. He was given the Nobel Prize for Literature in the year 1998. I have read 5 novels of his. The Gospel According to Jesus Christ. I've also read his Blindness and its sequel, Seeing. And you also have the famous novel, Death at Intervals, or Death with Interruption. Both mean the same. I read, and then the Cain. I find immense scope in these novels actually for seeing the resemblance of apocalypse as well as post-apocalypse. So you find José Saramago representing these two, apocalypse and post-apocalypse. I personally feel it is yet to be, because it's only a working paper, and I'm working on how you can see José Saramago hopping in and out of this apocalyptic and the post-apocalyptic frameworks, with the hyphen, of course. And without a hyphen, if you put it, then obviously it will acquire the stature of a theory, right? And when it acquires the status of a theory, obviously we'll have to proceed from the text to the theory and not vice versa. So with this particular scope for further research, right? Let me now say good thanks, of course, great thanks, of course, to Soka Ikeda College for this wonderful opportunity. And I also would like to thank all the participants for their patience. Thank you so much.
Thank you, sir. Sandhya ma'am, can you hear me? I think there is a connection problem with Sandhya ma'am.
Thank you, sir. Thank you so much. Dr. Rajakumari is going to give her presentation. Yeah,
Yes,
I can hear you. Everyone can hear you, ma'am. You can go on with your presentation.
okay, thank you. Actually now it's 11:57. Okay. Good morning to everyone. Okay. First of all, I would like to thank the management of Soka Ikeda College, principal, head of the department, and staff members of English for giving me an opportunity to present my views in this international webinar. And I'm feeling indeed privileged to share this session with my guru, my professor, who was my PhD examiner, external examiner, Dr. Anita Balakrishnan ma'am. Ma'am, how are you there? Anita ma'am? Okay. And also, I feel very happy to share this session with Dr. John Charles Ryan sir and Dr. V. Shivaraman sir. Dear participants, you have been listening to the valuable presentations of eminent academicians, and you'll be a little tired as well. So I try my best to make my presentation as short as I could. Now, back to Africa, rerouting attempts of African Americans. The topic of mine would undoubtedly facilitate to open a new promising avenue for research in African American literature, as it focuses on the growing trend of genealogy research. Actually, here genealogy, a study of origin and history. Initially, I addressed the issue of how the systemic racism leads to rerouting. Then I explain how the genealogy books, especially roots, and in finding their roots, created an impact among the millions of African Americans. And then I detail the growing trend of DNA testing through few real life experiences of the Blacks, and finally conclude how Ghana, a country of Africa, fulfill the Black stream and paves way for the journey of rediscovery. So let me first explain you what is rerouting. Here, rerouting means routing again. According to Novella P. Carter, rerouting occurs when events connect African diaspora to their homeland. Actually, there is another usage is there. Rerouting has been used to describe poverty. It also fits the diaspora context. And here I highlighted the word poverty as I associate the meaning with the quality and state of African Americans in American soil at present. Here, poverty means the state of being inferior. Actually, in the American soil, African Americans are treated as inferior. So the American soil fails to nurture the Afro-Americans. So the rerouting attempts are made in African soil. So this is what I'm going to try here in this presentation. So in the words of Carter, rerouting attempts are made to thread together African histories, its voices, and it's a land of identity and race and belonging. In the next slide, why do Afro-Americans attempt to reroute their roots in Africa? Actually, it's happening for two reasons. One is to escape racism. Here, racism is actually systemic racism that prevails in every governing body and institutions of US. And the next reason is to feel the sense of home. As I stated before, they fail to feel the that America as their own, as they are treated like worse than the second-class citizens. So actually, we have the feel that nowadays we believe that racism has become less habitual in the United States. But the depressing fact is that we must admit US is still ruled by the same old-fashioned values that were prevalent almost even after several revolutionary movements. Though there have been changes, but nothing significant enough to affirm that racism has completely been eradicated from US. Actually, to support my topic, I referred few genealogy books, and I had taken few real life experiences and new stuffs from mass media. And one of them is article of, I took it from BBC, US is unsafe to live. Ms. Mohameda El Muhaji, who is an African American who settled in Accra, Ghana, in South Africa. She had good education and experience, but she was always made to feel like a second-class citizen in American soil. She felt like that she could never win in America, so she moved to Africa, where she feels like she's a champion. And for her, moving was an opportunity to fulfill her potential and avoid being targeted by racial violence. If you read these lines, we can understand how frustrated she is. She says that I can't say what's happening in America today is any worse than what's been happening at any other time. So, and also she says, you might not have electricity, but you won't get killed by the police either. So she says that sophistication is not necessary. At least one can feel alive. So this is the reason she moved to Africa. And actually she made this statement a couple of years ago, but it's much relevant to the most recent brutal killing that happened on May 25th, 2020. A Minneapolis police officer knees on the neck of George, and he was pleading that he could not breathe. His last words were like, I can't breathe. This brings back that bitter memories of Eric Garner, who is in the next picture. He too was choked to death 6 years ago. And many more similar brutalities are happening every day. So US people recall the word of the Afro-American writer, especially you know Malcolm X. Long ago he told this, that's not a chip on my shoulder, that's a foot on my neck. So we all know that Floyd's death had led to civil unrest, is not seen in decades. Despite coronavirus pandemic risk, protesters are displaying solidarity by holding placards stating stop racist, like I'm not a threat, Black Lives Matter, is my son next, justice for the oppressed, racism is pandemic. So more than now we call this coronavirus as pandemic, they call the racism as a pandemic. So these slogans prove that how systemic racism is affecting the entire nation. Only brutal murders are getting in the limelight, but unheard stories of abuse and allegations are imposed on the African American by the police and white races are numerous. So one such story is reported by BBC. Here, Dr. Obadella Kamban is actually is a professor at Institute of African Studies in Ghana. 15 years ago, he was wrongly arrested and put on trial in Chicago, where he lived, after being accused by the police officers for having a loaded firearm under his car seat. Actually, he had an unloaded licensed gun, which he used earlier to secure a campsite in his car boot, but he was falsely charged. So this bitter experience and other painful memories he had in the society, that white racist society, makes him to settle with his family in Ghana. He had his doctorate in African University, and now he is the professor there. And he vowed to quit, actually, you can read these lines, like he vowed to quit the US after being the victim of what he believed was a racially motivated arrest by police officers, and he moved to Ghana in 2008 and has never looked back. So in fact, we know that this is one simple evidence of how systemic racism prevails in law enforcement body. We know that African Americans are constantly used to the misuse, exploitation, manipulation, and insult. No single African American can say that he didn't come across any taunts in his life. They are totally disheartened by the atrocities of the police officers and white racist taunts. But the latest round of attacks made by US president added fuel to it. I don't know whether I can talk about Trump in this webinar. Moreover, it's an online streaming. Since it's very much relevant to the topic I'm discussing now, I'm not against Trump. I'm just revealing to you what's happening in US and how it's affecting the Afro-Americans. Actually, Black Americans are very much used to the phrase, go back to Africa. But when it comes from the White House, from the president, they are much distressed. He made several racial comments, like the racial remark which he tweeted last year, asking the Congress women, 4 Congress, actually certain Democratic Congress women of color should go back and fix the places they originally came from. So I think that he did not just take aim at 4 women of color, actually 3 of whom were born in the US. He did so using a taunt that has long, deeply entrenched roots in African American history. Why don't you just go back where you came from? This particular remark had given a crystal clear picture that in every governing body and institutions of US, the systemic racism exists. So in the words of W.B. Du Bois, white racists see the blacks as imminent danger to their society. Here, the danger doesn't mean savage or brutal, as Frederick Farah put forth his classifications of races. Whites are civilized, Chinese and other Asian groups are semi-civilized, indigenous people and Africans are savages. The whole world knows how African Americans are intelligent, efficient, and resourceful. Even the cultural historians proved that slaves were not culturally empty-handed. They found that the Blacks had a very rich heritage and history, which was completely ruined, vandalized, and robbed by the European colonizers. Actually, in the words of Richard Drayton, the wealth of the West was built on Africa's exploitation. And John Henry Clark, in his scholarly article, The Origin and Growth of Afro-American Literature, focuses on the fact that Africans, before being forcefully exported to America, were culturally diverse and had a flourishing academic life. So they found actually in this, you can see that Africans possessed a wide range of skills. Skilled storytellers, creative performers, great musicians, earthenware pottery makers, blacksmiths, builders, wooden sculpture makers, colorful quilt makers, basket sewers, cultivators, and great dancers. Through centuries, Blacks were able to believe that they were made to believe that they are ugly, inferior, and savage. But several protests, movements, especially after Black Art movement, they accepted their blackness as a symbol of ethnic identity. We know that African American writers used art as a weapon to present the realities of their race. They polished their inherited genius and redefined their identity. Identifying the roots of one's ancestry is often a mystery. This mysterious journey of uncovering the stories of family histories have begun in the mid of 20th century. So here the finding roots, genealogy research, DNA testing, and here in the forthcoming slides, we have a glimpse of on all this: roots, in search of our roots, primer course on DNA testing, books on travel guides and heritage travel. Actually here, next slide, yeah, roots. Actually, writers like Alex Haley, Louis Henry Gate Jr., and many more had taken this mysterious and strenuous task and produced genealogy novels, tracing their own ancestral roots and other prominent personalities as well. Especially Haley's roots, the saga of an American family, created a genealogy boom. The saga charts the lives of 6 generations of Ali's family, starting with the assumed 18th century ancestor in the Gambia. I don't know whether it's Gambia or Gambia. A person named Kunta Kinte, who is enslaved and transported to America. So this genealogy novel, and as a mini series, it expanded throughout the world. The saga, it became the nation's top-selling book in 1977, and it was actually, the miniseries was officially banned until 1984. And this series roots exemplifies rerouting as it encompasses the reality of slavery, and it prompted viewers to actively search for the greater meaning, and also it spurred them to action. So Root went on to make history as a phenomenon of publishing, media, and popular culture, setting a way. Actually, here, popular culture, I reminded of, I don't remember the person name, but a rap singer used the Kinte's name and composed music album. So it sets a way of interest in books about America's many pasts. And in his appendix, he stresses how far he went to corroborate his family's oral history via documents found in 50 odd archives over 12 years of digging. while acknowledging the fact, that is, acknowledging the most of the dialogue and incidents are novelized amalgam. Actually, he, when introducing this novel, when publishing this novel, it comes under the category of fiction, and later it turned to be non-fiction. But there are a lot of controversialities there, since it is also of having facts. So they call it as faction. I don't know how far the word faction can be accepted. On the other hand, it is the most influential, actually, it is the most influential genealogy novel in the modern era. And on the other hand, the barren branches of African American family trees are searched with the support of advanced science and technology, especially genetic testing techniques, combined with actual research. Henry Louis Gates had produced many genealogy books, like In Search of Roots and Finding Your Roots, Faces of America. And among the other books, this is one such prominent book. He actually took the help of an elite team of geneticists and researchers. He traced almost the family saga of 19 famous celebrities, and one among them is Maya Angelou. This book influenced and created an interest in common people to find their family history. So in the past decades, only the rich and famous celebrities were able to afford for genetic testing. But now, even the middle class people, they could afford, as numerous DNA testing companies had boomed. One such evidence is English professor Cooke's certificate. African Americans connect with roots through DNA. Cooke, an English professor at Westchester University in Pennsylvania, when she tested her DNA, she found that she comes mainly from Cameroon and Congo, and she's very much excited. And she explained that she exclaimed while reading the document, "I met a Cameroonian at university, and I immediately thought of him." She recalled, "I want to say hi, my brother. How are you?" So we could see our face beautifully glows due to the overwhelming joy. Then ceremony of names. In this slide, you can see how Root, actually I told about Roots. The Root series, mini-series, spurred an interest in the Black community to give children African names. Actually, they call Amma, and they gave some names, but I do not know how to pronounce it. And Miss Bernice Bennett, after seeing a DNA result, she contacted Ivorian Association and changed her name to African name. Her name is actually, it's hiding other pair in a Gancha, Gancha. Okay, Gancha. Actually, it means twins. I don't know why she just named us twins. And when she visited Africa for the first time in 1994, she says that she's touched, that is just touching the continent. I felt so proud to be among Africans, she recalls. And someone even told me, "Welcome home, my sister. You cannot imagine what I felt that time. I was at home." So we could feel her excitement through her words here. And another interesting fact, which I didn't put this in the slide, Malcolm X, Malcolm X called himself X because Black Americans had no way of knowing their family history. So with the name X, Malcolm could be sure that he didn't have a last name with that a slave owner might have used. So he just don't want to use the Christian name. He converted himself to Islam, and he also changed his name, and he added X to his name, as he didn't know the family history. So next slide. Embracing the African American. So he's embracing himself. Not Malik Washington. I'm not Black or American. I'm an African. And later he says that he hates hyphenated word, African American. Actually, now people are not using hyphenated words. Actually, if it is of noun phrase, they are using African American. If it is of adjective phrase, actually for noun phrase, they are not using, and for adjective phrase, they are using African hyphenated American. But mostly people consider it as like something derogatory or belittling word. So here he also, he doesn't like it. So, and he questions African, American, both or neither. So here he doesn't know who he is. So finally he says that, okay, black is fine. He is accepting blackness. And he also states that having traditional African names, he didn't change his name to African name, but he tells that it can be kept for children. And he wished that everybody a desire to wear their traditional ethnic wears, especially here Kenta cloth, standing, and also standing for the Black national anthem is fun. So next slide. Yeah. Tracing your roots back to Africa, a primer course. So here, it's not just they're going for DNA testing or just changing the name. Many courses are introduced in Africa for tracing the roots. It's like the guiding light for the LSU African American genealogy team to trace the family story back to the African content. These crash courses and multi-session courses are offered. I think that we can hide this because I couldn't read. Oh yeah, just move it. Okay. It teaches the blessings and pitfalls of using DNA as a course material in research. So, and you can go for next slide. So there are many courses like that, even travel guides are there, and how to go for testing and whether it is really authenticated or reliable. So all such queries are answered by many of the courses which are offered in America. So here I have a few feelings and emotions of these ladies who settled in Africa right now, the sense of belonging. So I just read out. I didn't want my children to grow up in the United States. She added, it's something different when you get pulled over by the police and you don't have to worry about your life being taken. They are able to be children here. So here she put her children in international school, and she tells that at least police will not take them and they are safe over here. And here John, she says, this is John, my feeling as I was walking along the city's main streets was a sense of excitement. It felt almost like an out of body experience to finally be in Africa, said John. Then here, right, actually she's a journalist, and also she's going to the government schools and taking English classes for the students. And there is a comfort that comes with being around people who look like you and seeing people like you on billboards and in government positions. So she's very much excited, and she had been interviewed by the Al Jazeera television. And not only this lady, many of them had been interviewed, and it's quite available in YouTube. And here we wanted to be in a place where we can bring our experiences to people who are going to appreciate it, to develop, to help develop businesses, said Crystal 33, the owner of two women's clothing stores. She owns a store there. Slide. Okay, now these people, they move to Africa. They not actually simply they have the feeling that they have to go. Actually, Ghana, it's welcoming them. This is a place where the majority of 15 million Africans passed into slavery, and now they are invited. The Ghana is inviting the descendants to return home. Actually, in 2000, the country passed a law, and the right of abode and grants the right to stay indefinitely. So here, whoever has the DNA testing, and if it is of authenticated, they are willing to provide citizenship to them. So these Africans are very much happy to know their roots and through DNA and getting settled there. And Ghana is the first African country to open its doors to people of African descent from all over the world. I think we skipped one slide. Anyhow, okay, we can continue with it. So Mr. Thompson, a native of Maryland in the US, settled in Ghana 20 years ago. In an interview with Africa Renewal, he says that it was good seeing Black people, my people, in charge of the country. Sorry. So, my people in charge of the country. In America, everybody, like white people are in, they held the post, they hold the post, higher post, and wherever they go, they are of minority. So wherever they go, they could see only the whites there. But when they come to Africa, everywhere, wherever they just look at, they can see only the Black people. So since this sense of belonging is there with them, and Ghana is encouraging more Blacks to come. So some returnees have gone through the emotional journey of tracing their families through DNA testing. For the majority who just come to visit or to settle, like Mr. Thompson, actually Thompson, he didn't go for DNA testing. He just came here to feel the feeling of being in home, and is content with that. He is very much satisfied with that. Next slide. So here, heritage travel. It's not possible for every African American to offer to travel or more than traveling to getting settled in Africa is not possible. So they had their job like there, and they cannot just leave everything and come back or go back to Africa. So once in a while or once in their lifetime, they just want to have the travel. So here, heritage travel is surging in the era of DNA testing. It has a special significance for Black Americans. And for many African Americans, this heritage travel is as significant as pilgrimage. So as for other religions, they go for Kashi or Jerusalem or Mecca. For them, going to Africa is almost like a pilgrimage. And here they look for inspiration and cure to the trauma of slavery and a permanent sense of nostalgia for the lost homeland. And that's it. I'm just going to finish. And moving to Africa is not always motivated out of need to reconnect to their African roots. Many Black Americans are just emotionally spent or burnt out with African racism. So you can understand that they are motivated not just to simply reconnect with their African roots, but they are completely emotionally spent and burnt out with African systemic racism. It is quite precarious and dangerous. And I think that rerouting is definitely a quest of attaining some solace and spiritual healing. And I think that genealogy novels, actually a lot of more genealogy novels are available, but very less is researched. So we can explore more on this genealogy novels, and it may open a promising new avenue for research. We know that even after 2 terms of presidency of Obama, the US still remains deeply divided by race and class. So if we understand as like our true nationality is mankind, said by George Wells, only if we understand that our one and only nationality is mankind, we can be free from all form of discriminations. So let us hope the Almighty will bless us. And go for the next slide. Actually, here I linked one video. It is emotional trip to Ghana. If you click this video, you could see that how they are emotionally connected to that place, and we can experience their feeling here. It's just a 8 minutes video. I think that I can share this now. What happened? Could you watch the video, ma'am? Video is done.
Is there any audio, ma'am?
Can't you hear?
Okay, ma'am, go on, go on.
Okay, play it, ma'am.
We can't hear, ma'am, but the picture itself tells what it is. Go on,
Oh,
ma'am.
okay. You just put it on. Put it on.
Ma'am, I think you have given the link. The participants can
Yeah,
take the link and they can watch it, ma'am, with the audio.
Okay,
I
okay.
request the participants to take the link and watch it later.
Okay, okay, ma'am.
Nice.
Anyhow, thank you all for your patient listening. And it definitely gives a kind of solace to them. So I just want you to experience the feeling of these African Americans. I thank the organizers once again for giving me an opportunity. Thank you, ma'am. Ma'am, can you hear me? Ma'am? Have you muted? Sandhya ma'am, could you hear me? என்னாச்சு? Can anybody hear me?
Yes, Raji ma'am. Thank you
Yeah.
so much.
Thank you,
Dr.
so much.
Rajkumari, for your presentation.
Thank you.
Yeah, I can hear you, ma'am.
Okay.
Since we started by 9:30 and it is 12:30 now, you can post your questions to sokaenglish17@gmail.com. The participants can. Something is wrong. Yeah, you can post your question. I think it's okay. Am I audible to you? Hello. Yeah, as we have reached the end of the session, all the 4 sessions, I deem it my privilege and honor to thank all the participants and all the people who made this day possible. So I hope you all had a great day because this new avenues for research will help you people to proceed your research and also to guide your students. Those who are guiding your scholars, this will be definitely be useful to you. I take this opportunity to thank many people. First and foremost, I thank our management, our principal, who motivated us to do this during this COVID lockdown holidays, not holidays as you said, lockdown period. And I thank them for all the encouragement. I thank all the resource person who accepted our invitation and joined us in spite of having a lot of work. I thank Dr. Ryan, Dr. Anita Balakrishnan, Dr. Shivaraman, and Dr. Rajakumari. Thank you so much for being here today. And I have to thank Dr. Regin Silvest. He was the person who introduced me to Dr. Ryan and helping us, lending us a lot of support, right? For the past 10 days, every day he used to call me at least twice or thrice a day and he will inquire about the proceedings. I thank you. I thank Dr. Regin Silvest for all the support. Thank you so much, sir. And I thank Cape Comorin Publishing House. We are doing it in association with Cape Comorin Publishing House, and I thank the publishing house for all the support rendered. And my thanks are due to Mrs. Divya, my alumni. She was my student in BA, and now she is doing her research in Bharati Women's College. And she was the person, the technical support, who supported. She was with me till 11:40 yesterday, and she was helping me out in everything. I take this opportunity to thank her and her husband for giving all the support. And I should thank a few members of my department who shared the work. Dr. Suganti, Ms. Kavi Prabha, and Ms. Deepa, who shared the work and who helped me in organizing all this. And I thank all the participants. who were very patient in the beginning because of the audio. There was some problem with the audio. I thank every participant for being very patient with us. As I said, the feedback link will be sent to you through the mail, and you can post your questions through that mail, and we will definitely forward it to the resource person. Is there anything more? Anybody wants to share something? You can do it in the chat box. I think they all have expressed their happiness. They have, yeah. So can we end up the session now? You can post your comments through chat box. Thank you, Ms. Priya. Thank you, everyone. Thank you, Anita ma'am, for being a pillar of support to our department, ma'am. Yeah, the feedback form will be sent to all through the mail. Dr. Prakash has a question. I'll unmute you, sir. Just a minute. Sir, you can unmute and you can go ahead. Dr. Prakash?
Yes, ma'am. Yes, ma'am. Am I audible, ma'am? Yeah. Hello. Hello.
Hey. Dr. Prakash? Yeah, yes, sir. You are audible, sir.
Hello. 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 Hello, ma'am. Sir is there. Shivraman sir is not there, I think. I have a question for him. Otherwise, I would type in the chat box, ma'am. My question.
Sir, we are able to hear you. You can just go on with your comments, sir.
Okay, fine, ma'am. My question is very simple. Before that, just I would like to say I am very happy to see Shivraman sir on the screen, because in the year of 2011, I saw him at Periyar University in one of the conferences. I am very happy to see you, sir, on the screen. So my question is very simple. Why is apocalyptic literature is so strange? Because of the destruction or disaster or any other reasons for the apocalyptic literature?
That's the thing, sir. You can all post your questions. You can post it to Soka English 17@gmail.com. That will be sent to the respective resource person, because some of them have lost connection now.
Okay.
So let me take, let me conclude the meeting.
Okay. Sure, ma'am.
I think Mohammed Hanif has a suggestion. Please go on, sir. Just give your suggestion in the chat box. Okay, we conclude here, and I once again thank our management, our principal, and Dr. Regin Sylvest and his Cape Cormorant Publishing House for all the success. Thank you all.